It's time for the Daily Stand Up Podcast presented by Agile Dad with your host, Lee Henson. Without any further ado, let's get started. I usually don't find myself leaning in on spiritual stories, but for St. Patrick's Day this year, I thought I'd share with you 4 uplifting lessons from the life of St. Patrick. So, if you ask somebody, tell me everything you know about St. Patrick, you have 30 seconds on your marks, get set, go. They may know some information. And for people in my generation or the younger generation, maybe they would know the Veggie Tales version of what happened with St. Patrick. But if you got young children, you should probably watch that too. It's highly entertaining and educational. I don't want to do any spoilers for anyone. But here's a summary of the life of St. Patrick. So he was born in Britain as Maewyn Succat around 390 AD. When he was 16, Irish raiders attacked his family's estate. They kidnapped him and took him to Ireland as a slave where he tended to herds. Kind of interesting. After 6 years in Ireland, he escaped his captors and found passage to Britain on a ship. After nearly starving and suffering a second brief captivity, he was reunited with his family. He had a dream, which he read a letter, and heard Irish people imploring him to return to Ireland and share the gospel there. Because he felt that he lacked the proper education to be an evangelist, he was reluctant to respond to the call, but finally did around 432 AD. When he became a priest, he changed his names to Patricius or Patrick, which derives from the Latin term father figure. Gaining confidence in the Lord, he traveled throughout Ireland spreading gospel and baptizing converts. In his quest to make Christianity understandable to the Irish, he employed object lessons often, such as using a shamrock to explain the Trinity. Even though he dealt fairly with the non Christian Irish, he lived in constant danger of martyrdom. He also faced some opposition from his superiors in Britain. He faced all of his challenges with courage and gave of himself unselfishly during his 30 years of missionary work in Ireland. By the time of his death on March 17th, 461 AD, he had established quite a few Christian churches, schools, and monasteries in Ireland. His given name wasn't Patrick, he wasn't Irish, he didn't drive the snakes out of Ireland. Instead, the real St. Patrick was a gutsy, creative, tireless missionary in a land where he had been a slave since a young man. So, 4 lessons from his life. Lesson number 1: stay faithful even when life is hard. Maybe you haven't exactly been kidnapped by pirates and hauled off to a foreign land to work as a slave, but your life is bound to have some rough patches as well. Just as you're going through difficult stretches, make sure you realize that struggling and suffering isn't intended to last forever. It's intended to make us stronger. And maybe there's a reason why your life at this time is so hard. You need to remember that everybody has challenges and that your challenges are just different than someone else's. I remember the movie A League of Their Own, where Dottie Hinson, a star catcher for the Rockford Peaches, decides to quit the team just before the first game of the World Series, where her manager, Jimmy Duggan, who squandered the last 5 years of his major league career through drinking, confronts her. Quit now, he tells her, and you'll regret the decision the rest of your life. It just got too hard, she protests. It's supposed to be hard, he responds. If it wasn't hard, everyone would do it. The hard things are what make us great. I love that, right? The hard things are what make us great. Number 2, trust in a plan. Whether it's a spiritual God's plan or a different plan, if this guy hadn't been kidnapped and hauled off to Ireland as a slave, he would have never been able to go back and return to Ireland as a missionary. His 6 years as a slave were horrible, but during that time, he planted a seed, and he had seeds planted in his heart for the Irish people. When he dreamed about people calling him back to Ireland, he recognized that it was a call from God to redeem his years of slavery in Ireland. Kind of interesting, right? I don't know that I would have picked that up as a 16-year-old. I had many other things on my mind when I was that age. It's just really, really impressive. Okay, coming out at number 3, step out in faith. When he received his call to be a missionary and eventually an evangelist, he did not respond to that call initially because he felt that he lacked the education and training necessary to be effective. Feeling unworthy of a calling is something that often happens to us, whether we're called to be parents or called to do new jobs or called to even do things within our church congregation. Many of the heroes that we know in the Bible dragged their feet when God came a calling. I mean, if you think of Moses, when God spoke to him from a burning bush and told him he was to lead the Hebrews from slavery to freedom, he objected. He said, "There's no way." He protested that people would not believe that God had spoken to him. After God gave him three signs to use to convince others, Moses objected he was not eloquent and slow of speech and of tongue. But when God said, "You can do this," and gave him the right words to say, Moses insisted again, "Send someone else." Finally, after God said Aaron could accompany Moses as God's spokesperson, Moses finally agreed to do what he was asked. What about Gideon? When an angel appeared to Gideon and said that God was with him, Gideon protested that God had forsaken Israel. When the angel stated that God had chosen Gideon to save Israel from his enemy, Midian, Gideon explained or replied that he was the weakest member of the weakest clan. "God will help you," said the angel. "I need a sign," replied Gideon, and the angel gave him one. Later, when the Midianites and their allies amassed for battle, Gideon demanded another sign from God. When God complied, Gideon asked for yet another sign. How many signs do you need, man? Finally, after receiving the third sign, he agreed to lead Israel. You know, it's just one of these things that even though we're hesitant in life, and even though sometimes we don't have the courage to do things, we have to pull our act together. And then finally, number four, we need to meet people where they are. St. Patrick apparently was not an eloquent speaker or even a writer for that matter. In fact, some of his writings were called completely incoherent. But when he was called, he wasn't called because he was eloquent. He was called to be effective, and an effective leader he was. He reached and persuaded the people of Ireland to care deeply about the things they needed to, and he really brought people together and had strong communication skills. My point here is as you celebrate St. Patrick's Day, now you have a little tidbit and a strong story to tell about St. Patrick and about his life and about who he really was. And I hope that you can embrace those four uplifting things that St. Patrick really did to help make this day special and help bring joy to you and your family for years to come. As always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, have a great weekend. Until next time, do take care.